So I have to say that coming to the Nulo headquarters a couple of times now, you have a great setup here. It seems very warm, friendly. It is a Friday, and we are in Austin, so most people are getting to work from home today, or they're just not in the office just yet.
Yeah.
But when I was here the other day, there were dogs all over the place too. Not just that, but there was also pet food all over. I think it's a sign of a healthy, thriving pet food company.
Oh yeah, we definitely live the dream here. We have a lot of dogs during the week, but like you said, Friday is still an optional work from home. It was one of those COVID perks that I never took back. I think we've proven we can be pretty productive on Fridays, so it's good.
Not to get too far off into left field, but for you as somebody who runs a company, it's important to foster a healthy environment regardless of what the industry that it is, and it's little things like that that people really appreciate when it's all said and done.
Yeah, it's very true, and particularly in our industry, and being National Mental Health Awareness Month, talking about having pets in the office. Like, I think it really not only connects people here to what we're doing, it reminds us every day why we're doing what we do, which is to try to make premium food available to more dogs and cats across the globe. So having them here in the office walking around reminds us every minute why we do what we do, which is great.
Considering that this is National Mental Health Awareness Month here in May, and how important pets are in that whole process, I know that emotional support pets have become a little bit of a joke over the years, but our pooches, our cats, whatever the pet is, are huge in helping fight a sort of loneliness epidemic that exists, but also just giving that loyal companion regardless of whether you're going through the good or the bad, but certainly in the bad, it reminds you that you still have those things to fight on and to try and figure it out.
Yeah, it's very true. And there's even scientific evidence now that shows, there's been a lot of studies that have shown just the impact that pets can have on cortisol levels, for example, in humans. Like, you can see a drastic reduction. I think Washington State University did a great study that showed just 10 minutes with a dog will drastically reduce your cortisol level, which is why, you see a lot of times today, like Olympic trials for swimming, gymnastics, track, like you see pet therapy rooms now. You see campuses like Yale having pet therapy programs for their sports and athletics departments. So really, I think it's not just a feel good, but there's actually scientific evidence. And there's a hormone called oxytocin, I think, and that is like they call it the love hormone, but it's like when you're around a dog or a cat, it tends to increase the production of that, which makes you just a happier person. So,
yeah, that's the level that's off the charts for new mothers right after they've given birth.
Yeah. So good stuff. So it's also fun to have them here walking around the office every day.
So let's get into the nitty gritty of Nulo. You started this company, was it back in 2009?
That's when I founded the company in 2009. Yeah,
Why?
Well, at that point I had worked probably 15 years working for very large companies. In 2001, I founded what became the largest private pet care business in the United States. We had about 220 pet care workers doing roughly 12,000 at-home visits a month all over greater Los Angeles. It was an incredible business. We learned a lot, saw a lot, but what I started to see after about 4 or 5 years, I really noticed that there was just a proliferation of dogs and cats that were getting diabetes and that were obese and that were struggling with these sort of nutritional issues, which I didn't at the time understand. But as an engineer, I'm a former biomedical engineer by training. And so I dig in. I love to root cause everything to death, which I did in this case. And I found that, our industry is really a proliferation of these giant brands that have low meat, high carb, high glycemic foods, which is a perfect storm for things like obesity and diabetes. So back in 2009, I left that business in Los Angeles, and I moved to Austin, Texas to start Nulo.
Why Austin?
I had some roots here. I'd actually been going to games since 2001 randomly, and I wanted to be somewhere in the central time zone, right? Because they call it the pet food corridor, which runs up through Kansas, and the central part of the country is a place that I have a lot of visits to. And in addition, I go east and west. So I wanted to be somewhere central, and there's nowhere better than Austin, in my opinion, and that has proven definitely to be the case. Very much aligned with the brand and the ethos of Nulo is Austin. So,
yeah, very pet-friendly city for sure.
Very much, yeah. Love it.
So you mentioned that pet food is really run by 4 major corporations, but it's not like it's just big pet food. It's big other things as well. What are some of the other products that these major players are responsible for?
Yeah, it's funny because I went to UCLA Business School, and the first thing they teach you is never enter an industry where four players control 80% of the market and the distribution. But these are companies that, they're giant consumer products companies. They make things like chocolate and candy and jelly and cereal, and they also make pet food. So, that is not the brand that I run. We are all 1,000% about dog and cat nutrition each day, every day. So we're not thinking about, circulating ingredients downstream or things like that, or cost optimizing to into our life. Like, we don't have the marketing budgets that those giant conglomerates have. So, it's tough. Consumers are really struggling out there today to figure out like the difference between all these foods. It's really not obvious to your average consumer.
Well, and it's not just the marketing budget in terms of getting the word out for a brand that you're trying to convince somebody to buy. It's understanding all the different tools, deceptive and otherwise, to really draw people's attention to a certain product, which, based on all the activity that's been happening on grocery store shelves over the years, I mean, these are groups that have gotten really good at the psychological side of things.
Very much so. And probably another nuance that people don't realize is pet food is... the reporting of pet food ingredients, for example, on a pet food bag is very different than a nutritional label on human foods. So if you're thinking they're one and the same, they're quite different. And the major difference is that it's a very antiquated, I think it's a 1950 something regulation in pet food that basically the heaviest ingredient, if you read the ingredient listing on a pet food bag, it's the heaviest ingredient comes first. And so you'll find like some of these quote big companies talk about meat first in their diet. Well, chicken is, 67, 68% water. So when you cook it, it moves down the list in terms of where the ingredient order actually is as fed in the bowl, which is a really different story. So we will always supplement our diets with dehydrated meats. We take the water out first in our product. So once we cook it, the meat remains high as the overall percentage of the formula, which is why Nulo is really known for our high meat, low carb platform. But a lot of these companies have sidestepped being able to have that conversation with consumers because they can put meat first because it's heavy water-based. And there are even companies that string water-based ingredients together, so they sound really great. But when you cook the food and you actually put it in the bowl, it's a different story.
So when you were really getting going with Nulo, I know you talked about really trying to win that scientific battle, but at some point you realized that it wasn't a wasted effort necessarily, but it's maybe not the best way to spend your energy. Was there something in particular that led to this epiphany that caused a sort of pivot in strategy for you?
Yes. I think, early on, because we're so proud of the nutritional platform. I'm an engineer, so I geek out about all this stuff. But so I, of course, came charging into the market with our meat content and our low carb platform. And I think consumers are so confused nowadays. They just say, well, yeah, I buy the good stuff at XYZ retailer. And they could be talking about a food that's 65% carbohydrates. They just don't know. So people think, or their vet told them that this food was the best food, right? Which is a whole nother story. But, and there may be reasons why they're recommending foods, for example, that they financially gain from. So I think consumers are just confused. So we just found that competing on science was a very difficult thing. We are happy to explain it. And if we have 10 minutes, I can convince anybody that this food is much better than anything on the market. But we don't have 10 minutes generally. So I tried to flip. There are brands out there that compete on things like, I call it the shame game. They're like, no corn, no wheat, no soy, no byproducts. No, switch to this, right? And that's one way to market to consumers. The way that I chose to do it is what's the opposite of that? That's to turn that on its head and to inspire people, to think differently about what you're putting in your bowl. And I did that by going and surrounding myself with the most elite athletes in the world who think about nutrition. These are folks that, nutrition's so important to them and their performance every day, and they want the same for their pets. It's that simple. And so I've tried over the years to tell great stories of elite athletes that have very successful professional careers that also feed their pets the way they feed themselves. And so that's a great fit for Nulo because they really understand that.
Yeah, it's maybe a simplistic comparison, but if you put water in your car's gas engine, it's not going to run like if you put gasoline in. That's the case for athletes. That's the case for things like weight loss as well. As much as people want to put focus in exercise and physical fitness, that certainly matters, but that's a very small part of the battle, especially if you're losing that nutrition game.
Yeah, I mean, think about it simplistically again, with kids, if you feed them candy bars and sugar and pasta all day, you're going to have a hyper kid, and you're you're not going to have necessarily a healthy kid either. So
don't even get me started on that one, Michael.
but these are, dogs and cats don't have the choice about what they're putting in their bowl, right? So I always say it's incumbent on us to get that right, to like, we're their advocates, right? So we got to figure this out. We got to put the right thing in their bowl, because they're not making and with kids, like, they may get a candy bar now and then, but they're not living on candy bars. There are pet foods out there, arguably, that are the equivalent to a candy bar.
Yeah.
They're being fed multiple times a day to these dogs and cats.
Well, when you're talking about these big corporations selling candy bars and cereal, I mean, it's not that big of a stretch for them to think about the way to have the most positive effect on the bottom line, while still putting something out there that's not necessarily acutely toxic, but it does build up over time and have a horrific effect on that dog or cat's overall health.
I think so. I think you put it really well, but we just try to stay focused on what we're doing. And, that's one thing I've learned over the years, is like, nothing surprises me in this industry.
So talking about the formulation that Nulo has been going with for a long time now, it's not just high protein, well-sourced, and we'll talk about that for a second, but there is a probiotic element to that too. And I don't think I'd heard about that in pet food prior to learning more about Nulo. Was that something that you guys have been doing pretty much since the beginning? Pretty much since the very beginning.
Wow. We were one of the first, if not the first, to put the Gunedin BC30 probiotic in it. So you'll find it in a lot of human foods. If you go to like a natural grocery store, you'll see the BC30 probiotic in a lot of
spore-based, right?
It is. It's a spore-based probiotic. So exactly. So what the importance of the relevance in pet food is, like, a lot of companies will claim they have probiotics, right? They spray it on and then they cook it, right? These are live organisms, right?
Yeah.
So again, pet food's reported before cooking. So you can say there's this many viable organisms, but you don't have to report on it after cooking. We do. So the BC30 probiotic is a great example of, that's a spore base. So it's protected from heat. It's protected from freezing. We have it in our freeze-dried raw diets as well. But it also will survive stomach acids and extrusion and cooking and all those like harsh things that they're subject to. And then once it hits the right pH in the lower intestine, the spore will release, and it delivers the probiotic benefit to the gut where it's needed.
You guys offer a variety of different types of meats in your foods, both the kibble, the freeze-dried raw foods as well. Where are you getting all these different animals sourced from?
Yeah, it's predominantly North America, predominantly United States. So most of our proteins do come from the U.S. There are a couple of exceptions. I'm going to say, like, lamb. The best lamb sources on the planet come from New Zealand and Australia. So we do source our lamb from there. We source duck from France and Canada. So it really depends, like in the situation of duck, for example, like depending on the season and the protein delivery and the crop's the wrong word, but it's like the supply of duck. We have very high standards in terms of these ingredients. So depending on whether we source it from France or Canada, that season will depend. There are brands out there that just like, they talk about sourcing and things, and then they say, well, we know Chuck the farmer in Minnesota, right? But like they may not be having a good season, or they may not have that's the wrong conversation. The right conversation is like, what kind of integrity do you have in your sourcing practices, and like, where are you getting these ingredients from? We know all these things. Sourcing is a huge part of what we do. We have a whole team we have 3 animal scientists on staff here at Nulo.
I'm sure there are examples of pet food companies that have farms in the name that don't have any farms, stuff like that, right?
There are, and they love to tell stories about how they know the farmer and things like that. But it's sort of, I call it health washing, right? It's like, how do we distract consumers enough to like say, well, yeah, those things are important. Of course they're important. They're important to us, but we want to be sustainable. We want to be good citizens in terms of what we're doing. But at the end of the day, we have to remember what we're doing. We're trying to feed better food to more cats and dogs.
Yeah.
And better food means higher meat, lower carbs, low glycemic recipes with probiotics that survive. Like, those are the things that really matter at the end of the day. Whether your pet's going to feel good or perform well is going to be dependent on that, not necessarily that Charlie in Minnesota.
This is a very, very nerdy question here, so I apologize ahead of time. Where do you get the probiotics from? Where do those spores come from?
Yeah, so they are from a company called Carry Ingredients, and they make this probiotic. It's their patented version of the probiotic, and we source it from them, and they're based here in the U.S.
So you strike me as a fairly stoic dude, but in listening to you in other conversations, you are very competitive. And that is the result of you growing up as a competitive swimmer and then apparently also dabbling in gymnastics, which is quite the sport to dabble in.
Yep.
But what are some of your earliest memories of being in the pool and swimming competitively?
Yeah, I mean, I think I read this about you too. I think you were overweight as a kid.
I was a fat kid, yeah.
Same. So my parents threw me in the pool at 6 and they were like, okay, you're going to start swimming. And I started swimming, and then by the age of 7, I was breaking all the records and everything on the team. So it was like, I really learned early on, like I just had that sort of innate instinct to want to compete and to win. And Ricky Barons used to work for us for years. He's he's also an Austinite, but Olympic gold medalist. And he used to say, love to win, hate to lose. And that's, I subscribe to that exactly. Like that's, that just has been instilled in me since a little kid. And it's taught me things about like setting goals and persevering and even overcoming things like setbacks. Like that's, I mean, sports teaches you all that, right? Because not everything goes perfectly. Not every practice goes perfectly. So it's like really important to like learn how to adjust, to pivot, to keep persevering, to just have that kind of grit to keep moving. And that has served me really well as running Nulo.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that, because we want to live in a better world than the one that we grew up in, right? And that's the case for individuals, that's the case when you have kids as well, but that can be a little bit of a trap too, because you don't want things to be too comfortable. You want to create hard situations so that the world is a little bit easier to maneuver. Yeah. And sports is maybe the easiest route with that, because nobody starts good at sports. You start bad. Whether you're in an individual sport or a team sport, you have to work hard to get better, and you get pretty immediate feedback in terms of those competitions as to where you stand versus the rest of those that you're competing against. And people go one of two directions. People either fold and decide they don't want to do it anymore because it seems too hard or they're too discouraged, or especially if you have people in your corner who are encouraging you to stick with it and to try and work hard and figure out what you can get better at, you do get better at those things. And you learn that hard work is the path to salvation, I guess, in a sense.
So true. Like, I think you started to say it, but like, not everybody gets a trophy, right? Like, that's just the reality. Like, I mean, it's nice if you do, and when you do, you should celebrate those moments, but like, that's not the way the world works. And hard work, there's nothing that replaces hard work. Like, I see a lot of people today coming out of like, they come out of college and they just want to be a CEO. Like they've just decided that's what they're going to do. But it's like, I spent 15 years working for big companies, going through national training programs, like gritting it out, like going through all different functions of companies, operations, marketing, sales, strategic planning. Like, you have to put in the work, just like swimming. You cannot just show up and go to the Olympics. There's a lot between here and there that has to happen. So I think that's, those things teach you a lot growing up as an athlete. Yeah,
and as Caeleb Dressel has talked about, and we discussed it a little bit as well in our conversation before South by Southwest, it's a level of sacrifice that those around you pay a certain price for as well.
Very true. Simone will say the same thing.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, she has told me that. No, very much, and luckily they have their pets, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So you just mentioned working for corporations. Obviously, you are an entrepreneur, though, considering that you have started Nulo. Was there a point where you realized that you wanted to try the entrepreneurial route?
Yeah, I had worked for Xerox, then General Electric for 8.5 years. And then I was running strategic planning at Universal Studios in Los Angeles. And I'd spent at that point 15 years thinking about strategic planning, business planning. I was trying to take a trip to Colorado at one point, and I just realized I had Max the second at the time. I'm on Max the fourth now. Max the second had just gotten diagnosed with bladder cancer, so he could not make the trip to Colorado. So anyway, I tried to find a pet sitter. It was a disaster. I'll spare you the detail. But at the end of the day, I ended up canceling my flight, driving to Colorado with Max, who was super happy. Mm-hmm. But I had a lot of time to think in the car about, like, this is an industry that's so fragmented, it could use a level of discipline and professionalism. And that's what I did. I came back from that trip and I left Universal and started what became the nation's largest pet care business. You can imagine we had like the most discerning pet parents in the world in Los Angeles. We had a huge contingent in the entertainment industry, which is a whole nother podcast. But it was then that I just decided like to take the leap, and I really believed that I could create a program that people could be comfortable leaving their pets when they were traveling, but leave them in the safety and comfort of their own environment as opposed to boarding or kenneling.
And back to your swimming background, both growing up swimming at BU, you had a really good understanding of the discipline and organization and work ethic that it takes to get ahead in that regard.
Yeah, and by BU you mean Boston University, the other BU.
Oh yeah, I know people will refer to Baylor as BU, but I've always called Boston University BU for some reason, and Baylor's just Baylor.
I grew up in Massachusetts. I think that was, talk about discipline. I was also pre-med biomedical engineering, and I was captain of the swim team. So it was like I was traveling.
Oh my gosh! How did you have time to do all that?
I don't know, but I think that back to our earlier point, it's like you start to learn about juggling priorities and discipline and things like that. And that's kind of how I persevered through college. But it was, all those were great life lessons.
What is your favorite career highlight in the pool?
In the pool, I was All-American in the 100 butterfly.
Okay.
When I was 16, I went to Junior Olympics where Caeleb swims now at University of Florida. And then qualified for Olympic trials in 200 butterfly when I was 17. So those are probably my highlights, but didn't quite achieve the level of a Caeleb or a Chase that I'm working with now. But it's so fun to be around those guys because they're my tribe, right? So I love working with the swimmers. Could
you feel that something was on tap when you were about to qualify before you dove into the pool? Were you feeling good that day? You felt confident?
Very much, yeah. It was a weird, situation where I had done preliminaries in the morning, and then you come back and you swim finals in the evening, and somewhere in between, I took a nap, and my coach was in the room, and he saw me dreaming, and I was literally saying put your head down, go for the wall, and I was doing butterfly in my sleep, which I've never done before, but it was a weird thing where I visualized exactly what happened, and I ended up winning the preliminary heat, qualifying, and so it was what I had just dreamt hours before actually materialized and came through, and it was really cool. It was an interesting experience.
Yeah, successful people also will often talk about visualization being very important, and then being able to accomplish things. You talked about goal setting, resetting your goals at times, and we don't always achieve all the goals that we put down on paper, but an interesting thing happens in pursuit of those goals. It can often lead to new ideas of places you can go, routes that you can go, and other goals, of course, along the way. I guess I set all of that up to ask you, what are the current goals for Nulo?
Yeah, goals are so important because they help you see where you're going, and they help you avoid blind spots if you know what you're shooting for. So I think at Nulo right now, continuing to innovate is a major goal and priority for us right now, but pushing the limits. We're looking at lower processing of pet foods, things like that, ways that we can continue to raise the bar and raise the standards of pet food. The other thing is just to continue inspiring people. That's another major goal, is we want to, as we expand into Europe, we're looking for European athletes to tell similar stories to those audiences as well. And inspiring and storytelling are a big part of what we do. And then I think finally it's just scaling with a purpose. We are growing. We went from a startup to a national brand to now we're expanding globally, and it's, preserving the brand and the integrity of the brand is so important. And I think making sure we scale with purpose is really important to me. Making sure we're in the right retailers with the right partnerships, telling the right stories to the right consumers. That's all very purposeful. And I think that's a big goal that we have now, is to manage all three of those really well.
Scaling international, obviously you take a sort of pride in being very much American made right now, but I would imagine that process gets much more complicated when you start selling this food in other countries. Is that correct? Or is there still a path there to make that happen in those various places?
It depends by market. Yeah. So as an example, we have an office in Shanghai now, and so we do manufacture our foods in the US for China. We are currently working a lot through cross-border because general trade right now with tariffs is a little bit onerous, but with that consumer, they value American foods very much for their pets. So they seek, especially cat foods. Like the cat client in China really wants an American manufactured food. So that market, that's really important that we provide the product from here. In the case of Europe, we actually going to be manufacturing in Italy starting in the fall for the European market, because their regulatory bodies are a little bit different. Some of the ingredient requirements and things and the way that you report in pet food are different in Europe and the EU than they're actually in many ways a little more stringent, a little more. So it's beneficial to manufacture in Europe for Europe. So we're going to be doing that. We're launching in the UK and in Italy and in Spain starting in the fall.
Thinking back to the importance of sports from a little bit earlier, it is important for so many different reasons, including understanding how to both win and lose. Of course, either can breed a sort of complacence, but losing in particular can cause a discouragement that has knocked a lot of people out of the game. But if you stick with it, if you work hard, then you do learn how to win. But an important part of losing is also understanding any necessary lessons that need to be learned to have you avoid the same mistakes over and over again. For you, as somebody who has run two very successful companies up to this point, what is a biggest L that you experienced in the business world, and what was the lesson that you learned from that?
Oh gosh, I'm glad you're only asking me for one, but the one I'm going to share with you is one that I've done twice. So so shame on me. But I would say that is where I have relinquished control of the brand reins, if you will. So I got caught up in trying to bring in folks with big resumes from Ivy League colleges that, are brand experts, have worked at big shoe companies and things like that one would think that they would be a natural fit for a brand like Nulo. I mean, what I've learned is, and I've done it twice, where I brought in folks and then they bring out their playbook, which is they bring in their agencies. These agencies want to create their own brand, and over a very short order, what you start to find is that you don't recognize the brand anymore. And that was a very tough lesson for me. And so I had to talk about pivoting and course correcting. I had to reorganize and just gain, because the brand is one thing I've learned about the brand is it's not a marketing function. Brand is very much the DNA of the company, right? So that's hard to outsource to an agency. Everybody does it because it's hard. And so that didn't work, and that was probably the biggest mistake. But luckily, that happened right before the Paris Olympics, like the year before. So I was able to quickly take back control of the brand, start to hire the athletes that I wanted, go do their content days, meet these folks, put these campaigns together. And it's turned out really successful. We've won a number of awards for our Olympic advertising. We were often cited as an Olympic sponsor, and we were not, but we were quite visible. We got a lot of consumer impressions, over 1.5 billion impressions from our work that we did with these 8 athletes that we have. So luckily it was a good outcome, but yeah, that was painful. That was a painful lesson to learn.
Do you have all 8 of those athletes off the top of your head?
No, I do actually. So we've got 4 swimmers. We've got Caeleb Dressel, Chase Kalish, Reagan Smith, and Jessica Long, our Paralympian. She's amazing. I don't know how many medals between those 4 folks, but quite a few. And then in track, we have Gabby Thomas, we have Anna Hall, and Ryan Krauser. Again, like all 3 are just incredible rock stars. And then not to be missed is the gymnast Simone Biles, who we've worked with as well. So we have multi-year relationships with these folks, and they're incredible to work with. And the stories that I've gotten from them and learned about them and their pets and their relationships has been really invaluable.
Is there one that comes top to mind for you that is that you feel comfortable sharing?
Caeleb Dressel talks about this a lot. Like when he talks about he's the fastest man in the water. Like he's just, like, by any yardstick during his time, there was nobody that dominated the sport like him at that point in time. And you imagine the pressure that he's under, and the pressure to continue. Like, people just think it's going to go on forever, right? But he's got a lot of other priorities and things like that. He has a wife, he has 2 kids now. Like, he's trying to balance quite a bit. So it's a lot of pressure to put on one person. And I think the stories that he tells about Jane, he has an English lab. Like I have 2, Max and Yogi. He has Jane. And he talks about how when he comes home from practice, his favorite part of the day is when Jane greets him when he pulls up the driveway, because it's like whether or not he had a bad practice or, a good one, or he swam well at a meet, Jane always gives him the same welcome when he comes home. So it always takes him to a different place where no matter what's happening, he's able to sort of stabilize the way he's feeling about the world at that time.
So I wanted to end this conversation by talking about something that is very important to me. So it was really cool to hear you mention this in a different conversation, having to do with what is important for you as an individual, as a business owner, as a business leader, and that is integrity is the new transparency. What do you mean by that?
So the way I think about, I'll start with transparency. I think transparency is what you tell people you do, right? So it's a brand or a company telling you something. I think integrity to me is who you are. It's your ethos, it's your brand, it's how you behave day to day, right? So they're very different things. So transparency, as an example, there's a lot of health washing going on in not just our industry, but in the human one as well, where they talk about, go back to sourcing and having an entire marketing platform based on ingredient sourcing and things like that. That's not transparency, because what the integrity is what are we actually feeding these pets? What's going into their bowl? How much animal-based protein are they consuming? How many carbs is in that food, right? It's great that you got the duck from Minnesota from Tommy's Ranch, but how much are you putting in, right? So the integrity of what you're doing and day to day is something that you can't outsource to your marketing team. I see a lot of marketing going on in my industry, and transparency is very much a buzzword right now.
It's interesting because integrity involves doing the right thing when nobody is looking, but it's almost like you need a hype man or somebody to let people know that you're doing the right thing. But then that it gets into a gray area with integrity, right?
No, it's so true. And it's not just, the food or the consumers, but it's also even in retail, having integrity in your channel strategy, for example. There are retailers that get behind your story and build your brand. And if you tell these retailers you're never, ever going to do this or do that, or go to this retail or that e-com platform, and then you do it, there's an issue with your integrity there, right? So we've not done that. We have been very upfront from day one in terms of our channel strategy with our retailers who we value so much. And I think that that's another key ingredient, the key difference between transparency and integrity. Having business integrity is so important, just to help the brand grow and gain confidence.
For people who have made it to this point now, Michael, and want to find out more or maybe purchase Nulo, how can they do so?
Well, they can go to nulo.com. So nulo.com. It's nutrition and love squeezed together. I don't know if you knew that. It's a portmanteau. But so you go to nulo.com, and on there we have store locator. So you can figure out, we're pretty much like Petco, PetSmart, Amazon, Chewy, neighborhood independent stores, big supporters of the brand. So please, by all means, support them when you can. I just think, if it's a pet specialty retailer, we're probably there.
I love a good portmanteau, and I love a good pet food. So Michael, thank you so much for the time today. This has been a really enjoyable conversation.
Thank you, Trey. I appreciate it.